Welcome to the Leaders in Housing Counseling call. We're glad to have you here. We are going to really, I think, have a broad conversation today. The main goal is to talk with David Berenbaum and Jerry Mayer, and we may have Phyllis Ford with us as well. And the main framework is around certification, but it is fine to bring up other questions. We appreciate that David has been as engaged as he is with our community and as outgoing and flexible, and this is great. And so that'll be the main focus of the call. What we'll do first is to walk through the some NHRC highlights or things that are going on that just want to make sure you didn't miss and that you're involved with. And then I'll talk a little bit about the legislative update, and then we'll spend the most of the call on talking with Jerry and with Jerry and David and maybe Phyllis. The other thing is that we have, and then we'll make a plug about NHRC membership, as we always do. Really appreciate the support we're getting. We'll close out the call, and that'll be it for us for August. So thanks everybody, and let's move over to Ellie, and why don't you fill us in on some of the updates.
Thanks, Bruce. Hi, everybody. Last week, I gave you an update on the Housing Assistance Fund. Just want to let you know that we are hearing that states have been handing in their plans. You can go to the website that's listed here and find out what is happening in your state and how far along they are. But it's our understanding that that there's probably about 20 states that have actually submitted full plans and are waiting for Treasury to respond and approve or let them know what they want to see done differently. We're happy to hear from any of you. You know, you can email me directly if you've been hearing anything about your program, or if you have any questions about the Housing Assistance Fund program in your state, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions that I might be able to answer. Wanted to also talk with you about prioritizing first-time homebuyers. We have been working on behalf of Americans for Financial Reform to create a document that pretty much outlines some recommendations about how to prioritize first-time homebuyers. We've heard from housing counseling agencies, we've heard from lenders, we've heard from real estate agents. We've heard from other advocates in our world about the issue of first-time homebuyers kind of being pushed out of the market by cash buyers and private equity buyers. So wanted to let you know that we're working on that, and we should have a document fully baked and put together within the next few weeks. Happy to hear another item, we're happy to hear any feedback you want to send us about what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you are doing to address this issue. We know that organizations are coming up with some pretty interesting and innovative ways to help first-time homebuyers get a leg up in the market, and we'd love to hear about it if you want to share. I mentioned this also last week. Want to bring it up again. If you filed any CFPB complaints about anything related to the consumers that you're working with, we'd really like to hear about it. My email is there. Let me know if you filed the complaint, how it went, what the response was, and so on. And then the final update is working on Section 8 homeownership, and I'm going to let Bruce take that one.
Thank you, Ellie. And actually, I just want to, on the cash buyers, I just want to say that this is really resonating in lots of circles that we work in, not just around housing counseling, but in other forums where I get to talk. And One of the things to be very, very helpful is if you, in your marketplace, if there's any listings or advertisements that say things like no VA, no USDA, no FHA loans, or no down payment applications accepted, or anything that documents the activities that disadvantage first-time home buyers. This would be incredibly valuable right now. So please talk to your friendliest real estate agents. See if there's anything you can get. Maybe it's an MLS listing or whatever it is. You know, we keep hearing the stories, but it would be great to have some paper on this that we can show to policymakers. And that's really a hot topic in our world. For all the wrong reasons, but we need to get on top of it, and we're working on it. So the other thing is on this list is the Section 8 home ownership. We've talked about this before. These are the Section 8 vouchers, and they can be applied to home ownership. This is a good program that some of you have worked with over the years, and it's underused in the sense that not enough housing authorities are actually using it, and the ones that do are often relatively small programs, but there are a few that are totally busting it out and really making it into a vital form of home ownership. And why this is critically important right now is we think that there's some real appetite to take a look at this and really improve the performance of the program and the opportunity. And it's especially important in the whole question of Black and brown home ownership and who actually is in public housing or who gets the Section 8 vouchers. This is a real opportunity for very low income people to become to have home ownership. In many markets, it's the only opportunity to become homeowners. And we think this is just a really vital tool here that we need to make work better. And it will dovetail nicely with the down payment assistance stuff that's in the legislature. All of that's really important. And so we just started a discussion. We had the first meeting on Monday, and you know, really terrific, deep conversation about how to make this work. It was housing counselors, of course, but I mean, it was people from Habitat for Humanity. It was housing authority officials. It was some of the trade organizations that represent public housing, and also NARO, the Housing Executive Network. You know, we had a broad range of people. Some lenders were in the conversation, and we're really trying to touch all the bases and figure out what to do. So, I mean, if you've got some deep experience and you want to participate, let me know. But we are working really hard on this, and this will probably be a focus of our work this fall, especially. We think that the opportunity is big because there's in Congress, in the House and Senate, there's a lot of interest in the conversations we've had, even though we're just talking about it generally. But also, we think there's a real opportunity at HUD, that the new leadership in HUD is looking at everything with a new lens, and this is a big opportunity for our work. So much more to come on that. Just a plug for if this is something that you've got some deep knowledge and ideas about how to improve the performance. We're very interested in talking to you. Quick touching base on the legislative activities here. So on appropriations, as you know, in the House, we're at $100 million. So what we were campaigning on really has come to fruition, and big shout out to especially to Representative Price from North Carolina, who's the head of the THEAD subcommittee, and Representative Diaz-Balart from Florida, who's the ranking member. And we have we've seen great support in that committee. We're very excited about it. The real issue is in the Senate, and right now we are trying to get institutional players that have some really good connections to be able to communicate to appropriations leadership. And one of the places that if you are if you have particular strength in a relationship with Senator Menendez, who's really been a champion, this is an opportunity that he might be able to reach into the appropriations leadership and make the plug for $100 million. And we think Senator Brown might be another example of that. But if you have people with deep seniority could reach out at the Probst, this is the moment to do it. We're guessing that the budget's already been written, and now they're just kind of fine tuning the edges of it on the Senate side. And this is the moment where if we're going to push the number up, this is it. So, and the other area that is very, very exciting, we've talked about this before, about this idea of a down payment assistance. Chair Maxine Waters in the House Financial Services Committee has introduced a bill called Down Payment Toward Equity. It's the first generation down payment assistance, and it means that it would be limited to first-time home buyers, but also first generation home buyers, so that your parents don't currently own a house, meaning that there isn't the same kind of wealth that you have that might be able to help you become a home buyer, a homeowner. And that bill, every indication we've got is that it's in the current version of the infrastructure bill, the one that the Democrats are considering, and it's the one that is the one that has the very narrow just Democrats vote support, but it's got $329 billion, I think, in housing money, including housing voucher money. Some very important things are there. And we believe, our understanding would be that there's $10 billion for down payment assistance. And with this program comes with a housing counseling requirement. On a future call, we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. There's a set aside money for housing counseling built into the legislation, and it does lots of important things that we think will set important precedents for improving home ownership in situation. And you know, at this point, it's all about getting that infrastructure bill through the House and Senate. In the Senate, it's we can't lose a single vote. So the moderate offices, especially Senators Sinema in Arizona and Manchin in West Virginia, are crucial. We have talked with their offices, but if you're from those states, this is the time to communicate your support for it. This is really an opportunity for part of that conversation about generational change that all these things are doing. So with that, I want to let's move over to talking with our friends from HUD, and I'm going to have Ellie do the introductions.
Thanks, Bruce. So we are excited to have David Berenbaum, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for HUD's Office of Housing Counseling, and Jerry Mayer, the Director, the Office of Outreach and Capacity Building. And hopefully most of you on the call are very familiar with both of these people. And David has been on our call a few times since the start of his tenure. Both of them have been so accessible to us, and we really appreciate it. So I'm going to hand it right over to David and Jerry. They're the ones you all want to hear from. David and Jerry, take it away.
Thanks so much, Bruce and Ellie and everyone. It's our pleasure to be here with you. And as well, behind the scenes, I think we have Phyllis Ford, and we'll call upon her if any of our discussion leads in the direction of oversight and accountability. But first, I just want to begin by saying thank you to NHRC and all of you for being so active as members in our housing counseling community. It's genuinely a very exciting time, not only for housing counseling. I would almost dub it as a renaissance of what we are experiencing right now, the visibility, the discussion, how the role of housing counselors and their agencies are being celebrated in all of the conversations about racial equity, about moving beyond the pandemic, as well as creating an environment where you continue to be trusted advisors for consumers. And it's just so refreshing at HUD right now, because this infrastructure bill, the new leadership under Secretary Fudge, really is creating a dynamic energy. And I hope in the coming year or two, we're going to be able to implement some amazing and some very significant growth in the work that we do together. Today, I know that you have many questions about certification, but let me share with you that it is truly amazing. We know it's been a challenging process. We know that you've been in the vineyards really working to certify every member of the housing counseling teams at your respective organizations. But where we are today, as of August 1st, and frankly, where we are even now towards the end of the month, is nothing but an amazing accomplishment. We truly have reached a situation where the 1 million plus, likely to be 1.2 million consumers who we all work with each year will in fact be counseled or coached by a HUD certified housing counselor. And that is elevating our industry. Some of you have heard me speak to the history behind the Dodd-Frank legislation, and it was truly to create an environment where housing counselors would be trusted advisors and in fact would be a resource to consumers to make informed choices. It was intended to be an environment where you as professionals would be an ongoing resource to families, whether they needed assistance in housing in a rental situation, they were thinking about home ownership, they were thinking about aging in place, perhaps it was a homeless or rehousing situation, and so on. Ideally creating an environment where they could choose the housing of their choice with great counsel, great professional advice, free of discrimination, and as well have you as a lifelong advisor. You know, I reported at our conference, our community conference, just over a week and a half ago, that over the past 4 years, over 4,000 housing counselors have become certified. And of that group, as of August 1st, over 3,560 actually, were working for HUD housing counseling, HUD approved housing counseling organizations. Without going into detail, because we're first working to certify the numbers now, since August 1st, there has been a very significant bump in the number of housing counselors who have passed the exam, as well as the number of counselors who are working for organizations. It's a very significant sign that all of you are staffing up right now to ensure that you're able to meet the demands, first and foremost, to ensure ongoing tenancy for consumers who are struggling to maintain their tenancy and may be facing eviction, as well as getting ready to contend with what may occur, we hope it doesn't occur, but may occur with regard to, as some of the forbearances wind down, difficulties in managing their mortgage payments, and the work that we're going to have to do to support consumers to arrange for modifications or ongoing forbearances. So thank you for all that you're doing in that space. We have a long road ahead, but I'm very hopeful that in the coming year, we'll move from the pandemic and all we're doing to move beyond it to really focusing in on pre-purchase housing counseling once again. And we at the Office of Housing Counseling are looking to very innovative ways to, in fact, ensure that there'll be growth in our capacity. And thank you for what you're doing on Capitol Hill to ensure that funding flow continues to our important work. Jerry, I want to turn it over to you to say a few words.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you for that overview. That was really good. The thing I would like to add to that is we're looking forward now, on things like workforce development to help train and test new housing counselors and ensure that the next generation of housing counselors is available to fill roles at agencies, because we are seeing an increased demand for housing counselors, especially with all the new funding that's coming out from NeighborWorks and some of the states, all of it requiring a HUD certified housing counselor working at a HUD approved agency. So clearly demand is up, and also we're keeping an eye on foreclosure and eviction and the need to counsel clients in those areas as well, driving more demand for HUD certified housing counselors. And also we're continuing to work with housing counselors on the certification. Agencies continue to test At any given time, there are usually somewhere between 30 and 60 housing counselors coming into the FHA connection system every day, and we move them out and assist agencies in completing the employment verification process. So after August 1st, it did not slack off. We are still seeing high demand, both in exams and in employment verification. Testing is ongoing and will continue into the future. We are in the midst right now of our latest revision of the housing counseling certification exam. If you have counselors who have taken the exam and want to give us some input on the exam, we want to see that. That's really important to us. This is the time to give us that information. If there are questions that could be better, if there are questions that you consider maybe are a little bit obsolete, which can happen, or if there are new areas that you think we should be addressing in the certification exam, please tell us, and we'll look at that and see about incorporating those items into the latest version of the exam. And then finally, on the issue of compliance with certification, we're looking forward to working with housing counseling agencies to address potential compliance issues before they become real compliance issues. So if you have something that you're unsure of in regards to your certified housing counselor, ask us, and we will give you that technical assistance to get through that problem. Right. Thank you.
So if I may, Ellie and Bruce, I know one of the most significant questions and a very important one for the entire housing counseling community is, where is the grant, or NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity? As we have been sharing with you, to the extent we can, we are in the final steps of clearance. So the entire housing counseling community can expect to see that NOFO published in the very near future. You should be getting ready. Be sure that all that you need to do to apply for the grant, we've been sending emails out to everyone, as you're in a good standing to apply for the grant, and we look forward to very promptly reviewing those applications this year. We appreciate your patience. We're also regretful that this process this year took as long as it did. It is across HUD, some of the delays. However, we are very excited about the NOFO and its content, and we look forward to working with all of you as we move forward and make awards.
Thanks, David. Are you all ready for questions now?
Sure. And may I ask?
Coming in fast and furious. So I will encourage the participants to continue to submit your questions. And Ebony Cartwright, our program associate, will be going through the questions and asking them of you, David, and Jerry.
Okay. Thanks, Ebony.
Thank you, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So our first question is, so it says, I am in Norfolk, Virginia, and I have had questions from 2 clients who are questioning the HAF, and I have no answers for them. So I guess they're looking for answers to give. Where can they find answers to give their clients?
So I'll take that. I'll take that, David. So there's a link that is within the slides, and the slides will go out with the recording of this webinar. And in that link, it's sponsored by the National Council of State Housing Agencies, and they are keeping track of what is happening in every state. And you can go to that link that I provided in the slide, and then they have a map, and you can click on your state, and it'll let you know what is or is not currently available about information related to your state's Housing Assistance Fund program.
Thank you, Ellie. Okay. The next question says, HUD has stated that there is no bias in this exam. Oh, I guess this is in regards to the counselor exam, but we haven't seen any racial, gender, or age data that supports or contradicts the statement. What actions are being taken to gather and share this information with agencies and the public regarding exam pass and fail rates to prevent employment discrimination and ensure that there is equitable opportunities to take and pass this exam?
I think Jerry and I will both respond to that question because it is a very important issue. First, I want to say that the demographics of frankly the counselors who have passed the exam are extremely diverse, as are, of course, the agencies we work with. The data set to, in fact, examine race, national origin, other issues, the exam, when it was created, the Office of Housing Counseling and our subcontractors did not collect that data. That is something moving forward that will change. However, our analysis of who has passed the exam really demonstrates it is an extremely robust and diverse group. Jerry, I'll allow you to take it from there.
All right. Well, thank you, David, and also thank you for that question. You know, this is an issue that has come up recently, and it is a good question. You know, and like David says, it's not one that, in terms of tracking demographic data, that we considered when counselors registered for the exam. We made the assumption, and perhaps, you know, it needs to be corrected, and I think we are going to correct it on the next version of the contract when we do, is that we assumed that housing counselors working at housing counseling agencies are reflective of their communities. When we designed the exam, the advisors who helped us were housing counselors, again, working at those same kind of agencies. So we just assumed that the diversity reflected by the housing counseling community would translate through to the exam. Now, on top of that, we also have psychometricians who look at the exam for this specific issue. But hearing the issue raised, I'm going to say that that's not enough. And so we're going to do better going forward and make sure that we can positively affirm that the test contains no racial biases. But it's going to take us a little time to get that in place.
I'll also add that as of this moment in time, over 95% of the housing counseling community has passed the exam. In fact, it's a higher number than that, no doubt, since the last time the data was provided to me. We've also made efforts to ensure that if there are any issues with regard to, in fact, language or taking the exam because of diverse languages, that accommodations were in place. But we will be changing how we report on demographics with our next subcontractor. That is a commitment.
Thank you both for that. Next question is, do HUD certified housing counselors have to be exempt, full or part-time employees, or can they be contractors?
Jerry?
Sure. They have to be employees of the housing counseling agency. They could be full-time or part-time. We are agnostic about how they are paid, whether they're paid with a W-2 or a 1099 is not an issue for us. However, agencies should be very careful. We do not want to see the subcontracting out of housing counseling services to another entity, especially to a for-profit entity, for example. So while we're okay with it on an individual employee basis, they do have to be employees of the agency, and full-time or part-time, that's up to you all to sort out.
Thank you. Next question. Can you speak to the HUD final rule requirement for certification regarding education workshop presenters? Also, where is the information located in the HUD handbook or final rule for reference?
Oh, okay. Now, when it comes to your first-time home buyer workshops, things like that, what we want to see is that the HUD certified housing counselor oversees the workshop, does the curriculum development, collects the data, does the reporting, and ensures that the workshop is being done correctly. It is perfectly okay to invite guest speakers and educators and teachers. For instance, if at an appropriate point in a first-time homebuyer workshop, You want to tell people about home inspections, bring in a home inspector and they can say, I'm a home inspector and this is what you can expect when the home inspector comes to your, to the property, and this is what the report will look like. That is perfectly fine. The course doesn't have to be taught by the certified housing counselor, but they must oversee it. If you look in our frequently asked questions on homebuyer education on the HUD Exchange, you'll find questions relating to this that you can reference with the appropriate regulation references as well.
Thank you. Next question. If an agency is losing their only HUD certified counselor, who should notify HUD? The agency's executive director or the certified counselor?
The agency's executive director certainly should let us know because they're going to need some technical assistance to get over that rough spot. And it wouldn't hurt if the housing counselor let the point of contact, HUD point of contact, know so that they can also assist the agency. And also so that we know that the housing counselor has left, we can advise them about FHA connection, unchecking that employment verification box, and getting ready for that counselor hopefully to pop up at another agency.
Okay, next question. How or where do we provide the feedback on the exam questions?
Oh, well, feel free to send that right to me because, we wanted to reach our senior management in the OHC and also reach our certification team and our contractors. So to me, and it will get express delivery over to the right people.
Next question. What is the primary reason for revamping the exam?
I'll jump in there, Jerry. I think that really it's a matter of keeping it fresh and appropriate for the challenges and the opportunities that we are currently seeing in housing counseling. For example, it's very likely we are going to see a whole range of new mortgage products designed, as you heard already from Bruce and Ellie, to promote generational housing opportunities. Also, there'll be a variety of programs that are being discussed right now with down payment assistance, or also looking to incentivize with lower interest rate or other types of mortgage programs that are under discussion across both the GSEs and FHA and elsewhere. So there'll be new announcements. And so staying fresh with all of the products that are available and their qualification factors are just one very straightforward reason to update the exam to make sure it's pertinent. Another example, for example, I know many folks had particular trouble with the fair housing component of the exam. I think we all agree that it's a very significant responsibility that we have to educate consumers to their fair housing rights. But look at the focus right now, for example, on valuation and appraisal. There are going to be quite a few, I believe, new rules, perhaps guidance, perhaps even enforcement or investigation in that space. As many of you are aware, Secretary Fudge was asked for HUD to lead an interagency effort to look at valuation and discrimination and appraisal. I hope that's and I trust it will be a very productive process. Again, that's an area for all of us to become familiar with, and no doubt is something that may be on a future exam. It's something that we should be familiar with. So it's a matter of also ensuring that the exam is pertinent for today's issues. And we've been doing tribal consultations, and we've also been doing listening sessions with tribal leaders across the country. And they've been giving us some serious guidance with regard to the distinct needs in tribal communities and tribal territories. And so we're taking that all into consideration as we move forward. We wanted to be sure not only do we have a national standard, but also this is really documents the professionalism and the caliber, the capabilities of counselors in all aspects of our work across the country. One more example, we have a need to increase the number of certified HECM and reverse mortgage counselors. Besides the importance of reverse mortgage counseling for anyone getting the FHA HECM product, there's a growth in the area of private label market, private sector loans now again in that space. And we're beginning a process internally of really trying to get our arms around that to give some best practices and guidance, but in advance of releasing the new handbook, which we're working on really putting through clearance at the end of this fiscal year for all of you. Jerry, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, just one other item, and that is that when we analyze the exam's performance during the year, we get statistics on individual questions. And if we see a question that is performing as an outlier, for instance, everyone seems to be missing this one question because maybe there's something wrong with it, we analyze that question and see if we can improve it. I'll give you an example. We recently had that situation with a multi-part math question that really combined 3 math concepts into one question. And those of you that have taken the exam are probably familiar with what I'm talking about. So what we did is we decided to simplify that question by breaking it up into separate questions. So we're still testing on the same concept, but we're simplifying it for the test taker. We also, in addition to everything David said, we analyze the performance of individual questions and how counselors are doing with those.
Thank you so much. Our next question. I am seeing an increase in the number of people with housing choice vouchers being displaced because landlords are not accepting the vouchers. Will HUD permit voucher holders to use the voucher in a hotel?
So there are several important issues there. First is source of income being used as a proxy for racial or national origin, or familial status, or some other form of discrimination. And I think that the agency, the counseling agency that's experiencing this, should consult with their FAP or private fair housing FIP in their community, because there may be an underlying discriminatory issue besides source of income. In many communities, of course, and state source of income is now protected. And if that's the case, that's a more straightforward mechanism of looking at the civil rights side of the equation. With regard to what HUD will do, we're going to have to follow up on that question. And if you could send Jerry and I an email with the question, we'll follow up with the appropriate response. Let me say that in particular, this administration is already committed to affirmatively furthering fair housing, to increasing fair housing enforcement and activity across all of its program. And that's in particular noted in the very strong racial equity analysis that's occurring across HUD at this time as a result of President Biden's executive order on the first day of his presidency. So we'll follow up with a response there. Jerry, any other thoughts about that?
No, David, I think you covered it. We really do need to check in with the other part of HUD, the public housing folks, to get a really good authoritative answer for you. It is a great question and an important one because we want to get people off the streets too.
Thank you. Next question. What will happen to the agency without a HUD certified counselor?
So first, let me check. Is Phyllis on the call? Phyllis, are you out there somewhere?
Yes, I'm out here. Are you hearing me?
We are. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for joining us today. So Phyllis, would you mind responding to that?
Certainly. Of course, there is not our desire, but if an agency does not have a certified housing counselor, that agency has to go into inactive status until such time as they're able to obtain a housing counselor who has their certification. Does that help?
Yes, and Jerry, can we speak to as well the steps we're taking to try to work with those agencies to have a successful outcome here?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the last thing that we wanted to see was any agency going because of this non-compliance issue. And so we're working on a daily basis with agencies to cure that non-compliance. And after the final compliance date, a number of agencies did have to go inactive because they had this non-compliance issue around certification. But every single week, we bring back several agencies back online once their counselors train and test. And we're working with other agencies who are still struggling. But we hope to be back up to full strength very soon. And also, you know, we're providing technical assistance on a daily basis on FHA connection issues, validating those counselors once they take the exam. The CERT team is still active and still working with all of these agencies. So if you have an issue around an inactivated affiliate in your organization and you need that technical assistance, please reach out to us and we'll be there for you.
Thank you all for that. Next question. What is the average grant size from HUD?
You know, that, Jerry, do you happen to know in training, for those who are training partners, the average award size?
Well, you know, there's so many factors that go into this. The number of clients seen, the number for a intermediary, you know, the number of affiliates or branches. You know, so I could only really give a range, and I'm going to confine that to like and say that it could, with a perfect score, depending on the amount of money that is out there this year. Remember, we have $5 million last year. I'm really relying on historical windage here, somewhere between the teens and the 20s, you know, for a typical kind of award for a local. Intermediaries, it's very hard to say because no two of you are alike when it comes to characteristics.
Yeah, let me add to that it's really a mistake to try to figure out an average award, because even within the range of our organizations, each program varies so greatly. Some organizations, for example, focus on elder issues. Others focus on landlord-tenant exclusively. Others provide the whole range of counseling services, or perhaps reverse mortgage alone. And then also, the cost for providing those services really vary around the country. And HUD's formula allows for great flexibility as long as you can justify your costs to federal standards. So what I really suggest you do is take a look at the last award announcement for intermediaries, state housing finance agencies, multi-states, as well as locals, and get a sense of what the agencies are doing. There are brief descriptors with each of those. I think you may find that more helpful than trying to think about an average.
Thank you. Next question. If an agency is not HUD certified, can they still offer housing counseling?
Well, that's a very intriguing question. You can offer housing counseling, but it will not be HUD approved housing counseling or offered by a HUD certified housing counselor. I will respectfully state that if you would like to receive any federal dollars from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, or any states that are flowing federal dollars, you need to be a HUD approved organization. You can apply for funding from private foundations or other sources and be a social enterprise or a not-for-profit organization who is doing housing counseling. But I believe to receive funding in that space will become more challenging in the future as more and more of our organizations, in fact, have received not only one counselor certification, but frankly, many are at full certification within their counseling population. So you can, but under Dodd-Frank, HUD dollars, and we also respectfully believe many of our partners in federal government and frankly the private sector are looking to HUD certification as the seal of the good housekeeping seal, so to speak.
Thank you. Next question. How many organizations are HUD certified housing counseling agencies? And after August 1st, how many organizations, if any, had their certification pulled because they had no counselor on staff?
Sure, that's a great question. And as of today, Jerry, do we have that number handy? Do you have that in front of you?
Yeah, sure. Let me
Great.
just pull it up.
But first, before we provide that number, I think it's also important to understand that looking at a number of the total number of agencies. Again, each agency serves a different level of sessions, provides a different level of sessions each year. I will share with you, first, as we noted earlier, we want every agency to be certified. We want you all to be operational. But as of this moment in time, the organizations that are not certified represent less than 1% of all sessions annually. I'm not saying that to be harsh. What I am saying it to say is that we are in a good place to meet the needs of the public, and that is our most significant priority right now. Providing foreclosure prevention, eviction prevention, all the other services we do to the public at large. That said, let's look at the numbers. Jerry?
Well, right now, as of today, there are 1,561 total active housing counseling agencies. And the nomenclature, is we approve housing counseling agencies, we certify housing counselors. Now, the agencies that are inactive number 121 right now. And like David said, most of them are accounting for less than 1% of the total volume of one-on-one counseling. It's actually about 0.63 or less at this point, because many of them have recovered over the last couple of weeks. And the intermediaries have been doing a very good job of filling the gap, as well as other agencies. But our concern is to get these agencies back up and running and in compliance as soon as possible. And so we're working with all of the ones that are in progress to ensure that.
Yeah, and again, I want to commend everyone, because we know this is a challenging exam. We understand that over the past 4 years, this has been a big push for our industry as a whole. And we are going to be working to ensure that everyone comes across the finish line. I'm actually extremely hopeful right now because of the tremendous increase in counselors who have been certified between August 1 and in fact today. What it really signals to me is that we're moving beyond the need to certify at least one counselor to, in fact, our organizations are realizing adequate counseling staff, which is equally important. Because in fact, if you have 8 counselors on staff, we want to see all 8 of those receive certification so we can meet the need right now for the public. And it appears we're really getting to that point where folks are really focusing on the full staffing and in fact, hiring even more counselors.
Thanks, David and Jerry. This is Ellie. I want to just jump in because there are several follow-up questions around bias in the exam. And I just kind of want to make it all one question and paraphrase. But essentially, what's being asked is, if the data isn't public, how do you know? Can you make the data public about what you already know based on the number of people who have taken the exam and where you're getting your information, and can you make that public? Number one. And then number two, let me just kind of make a finer point on it. There's a suggestion to possibly send a follow-up survey to those who have already taken the exam, so that you get a sense of the racial demographics of who's passed and who hasn't and who's had a hard time with it. And then finally, there's kind of a question around what would you do if the result of your data does indicate that there's bias? And is there any chance that if there is an indication that would put the final rule on hold? So I'm sorry, there's like kind of 3 or 4 questions in there. But I wanted to make it all
could
happen.
you repeat that last question one more time?
What will, if you do find that there's bias in the exam as you go forward, what will be the result? Is there any chance that there'll be a delay in the final rule?
First, we are beyond the deadline date of the final rule. There will be no extension. Second, we have looked at demographic information to the extent our subcontractor can make it available to us. And there's nothing to indicate, based on those who have passed the exam, which is the overwhelming majority, 95% of counselors at the time we did our census, have passed the exam now. They are, they have passed. There were many test takers of all backgrounds who passed the first time they took the test. I think there are ways we can streamline and take a fresh look at the exam to ensure diversity and robust availability in multiple languages of the exam moving forward. But there is no indicators right now from any due diligence that I have seen since I stepped into the role that this exam has been discriminatory. We do acknowledge it is extremely challenging, but we were required under Dodd-Frank to have a rule, that have a certification, a licensing requirement, if you'd like to call it that, that would ensure that every housing counselor is respected by their peers, not only in real estate, but financial services and elsewhere. So we acknowledge it is a challenging exam. We will be asking our next subcontractor from the very first moment to collect additional data. Based on the data we have today, in fact, it is a very, very diverse group of counselors, and we're extremely proud of each and every one for passing the exam. And we will have zero tolerance for any form of concern about the test with regard to it could be discriminatory. We'll look into it, we're going to examine it, and we'll be transparent. But based on our due diligence to date, when I learned of this concern, there's nothing to indicate that it has had a disparate impact. Jerry, anything you'd like to add to that?
Oh, just to reinforce, what you said is that we share the concern because the question really, hinges on the concept of how do you know? And we are going to delve into this very deeply so that we can assure housing counselors that there are no biases, and if discovered, acknowledge them and correct them, immediately. We don't want housing counselors to feel that there was bias in the exam. We don't want anyone disadvantaged. And we will promise to investigate this, as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and we'll be the first to say if there's any concern raised by experts in the field or our subcontractor who is an expert in this type of testing. If we need to make modifications, we're going to consult with the counseling community, we'll acknowledge it and do it. But nothing to date, and we have asked the subcontractor to look at the issue, has in any way documented any form of discrimination. In fact, where people have failed, it is among all groups. So it's a challenging exam, we acknowledge that. But again, congratulations to all of you who have succeeded. The counseling community and our agencies are positioned well for success. And in fact, the number of counselors now appears to be exceeding even our expectations for this moment in time.
So just one final thing I'll add, because it was buried kind of in the series of questions that I asked, but it was brought up the possibility of doing a survey of those who have already taken the exam so far to get a sense of demographics of who has passed and who hasn't.
So I think that is a healthy idea. I'm not sure the data would supersede existing data that we have from the exam, but I think the idea of a survey on multiple fronts is not a bad idea. It would take our office some time to do that because of paperwork reduction requirements that federal agencies have to follow. But I think informally as well, we're open to all feedback, regardless of whether it's from NHRC doing a survey or ourselves. We do know that it's an extremely diverse population, and we're very proud of that. It's as it should be, because we serve a diverse community.
Thank you all so much. Next question. If a HUD certified counselor leaves a job, will she or he lose the certification if they decide not to perform counselor duties for a while? And if so, what is the time frame?
Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that if they do return to work for another HUD-approved housing counseling organization at a later date, that they in fact will be recognized as a certified housing counselor. And as of this moment, there is not a time frame. Is that correct?
Well, actually, there's a 7-year
Okay.
timeframe in FHA Connection for obsolete records, and that's driven by PII regulations and requirements. Basically, if a counselor leaves the employment of a housing counseling agency and that agency decertifies their employment and the record sits dormant in FHA Connection for 7 years, it's subject to being purged. But if they pop up before that time at another housing counseling agency, they are good to go.
Thank you both. Next question. The question I hear a lot from a lot of fellow counselors who have all passed the exam they are looking for an increase in salaries or rate of pay. The counselors who have passed this exam and now are versed in other areas of housing besides their specialty and is expected to provide these services by their employers. They are looking for increased compensation. Uh-oh.
So it looks like we just had a quick break here, and let's see if we can get this connection restored. Ellie, can you hear me?
Yeah, I don't think that it's us.
Oh, well, so you think it's, so can we, so David, can we still hear you?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Jerry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you, Jerry.
All right, great. So why don't we just continue with the question, and then when David gets back, we can pick up where we left off with David. So could you repeat the question?
Sure. So in essence, counselors who have passed the exam are now looking for an increase in salaries since they are now well-versed in many areas of housing counseling. So I guess the question is pretty much, will there be an increase in compensation?
Well, you know, in general, HUD doesn't get involved in salary and compensation, you know, for any employee of a housing counseling agency. That is really, you know, something for the agency itself to set. But I can tell you that I really hope that that's the case. You know, a recognition of the value brought to the industry by the HUD certified housing counselor and the value that they add to that agency certainly is worthy of recognition. And I would hope that agencies are able to respond to that.
Could I jump in on just to add something to this, which is one of the challenges that we're having today. Oh, there we go. Welcome back. One of the challenges we're having today is the cash flow for the housing counseling industry. So it's organizations that don't have a lot of cash. It's a very tough time to raise salaries. We hope that that will change dramatically when the FY 2021 money flows, when there's, well, the NeighborWorks money will be flowing soon. We think that that gives organizations more range. I mean, I'm not telling anybody what to do, but in the world of difficult things right now, cash flow is a really big deal for especially the smaller counseling groups. So hopefully that's partly a temporary problem.
So Bruce, my apologies, my internet dropped for a moment, but I'm glad it reconnected. So I missed the earlier part of the conversation, but I'm going to assume it has to do with moving the NOFO through and expediting contracting. And the Office of Housing Counseling is taking steps right now to ensure we do that in a very timely and unprecedented way.
Well, actually, it was a different question,
Okay.
and it was simply that the question was, can we get paid better for having passed the exam and having more responsibilities?
Well, yeah, that's a very important question. And, you know, I've shared this with several folks that I've been speaking with executive directors. They are beginning to recognize that having a HUD certified housing counseling on board is critical to the success of their missions as organizations. And part of the recognition is that because there's such a need for more counselors, that they're probably going to have to make a decision to elevate compensation to pay those counselors. Now, there's tensions, right? Because all of the not-for-profits, whether they be a large social enterprise or a community-based organization, have stresses on keeping the doors open, running the business. And we want to do everything in the Office of Housing Counseling we can to support board of directors and executive directors and other managers to elevate compensation for housing counselors. And I'll add also related benefits, health, retirement, and other aspects of enjoying where you work as employees and as professionals. We also believe that elevating the role of counselors through certification demonstrates the importance of the profession to private sector partners who we work with. And so we do believe that there should be adequate compensation for the services that our community, our counseling organizations are providing. And we're going to be working to support that, whether it's through collaborative work with government or the private sector.
Thank you. Next question. What are the requirements for an agency with one full-time certified housing counselor in regards to hiring or contracting part-time certified housing counselors? Is there a minimum hours required? Is there a minimum pay rate required? And then lastly, does the certified housing counselor have to live in the state of the agency they are contracted with?
Those are really great questions. Let me do a shout out to Phyllis again, if she'd like to jump in there.
Indeed, it was a great question and indeed a difficult one to answer. Let me try to take it by points. First of all, I think that as it relates to, and I may have to get back to you because I may have to check to see what the situation, but whether or not your counselors have to live in a particular state would probably be dictated by however your state is documenting you, how your state is approving you. HUD does not speak to that. We are looking right now at the requirements for offices being located in the states and the cities in which these services are being provided. But we have been silent on where the counselors are actually living. So that's my answer for that one, but I will put down a note to see if I'm correct. I know HUD would not be making a statement there, but there may be some requirements as it relates to the state in which you're located. Can you give me the second question, the second part of the question again?
My apologies. Is there a minimum amount of hours required? And is there a minimum pay rate suggested?
No, I can say no because HUD does not address that part of the relationship between the Housing Counseling Agency and the staff. We are very silent on salaries, although we just heard our leader talk about what we know needs to happen in terms of a proper justification for being recognized financially for the work. But we are very silent on the number of hours and the amount being paid. And there was a third part of the question.
Oh, let's see. I think that was pretty much it. What is the requirement for an agency with one full-time certified housing counselor in regards to hiring or contracting a part-time one?
Okay, well, that is a very good question because it addresses what each agency do in order to meet their workload. You have written a work plan, and that work plan requires that you service a certain number of people. Now, the rule may say that you have to have one certified housing counselor, but in actuality, for compliance, you have to have sufficient certified housing counselors to meet the demands of the population that you're trying to serve. So what we would be doing is looking to you to determine what you need to meet that demand. when we come out and take a look at the work that you've done, and you may have said, well, I serviced 4,000 clients, but I have one counselor, that would be a red flag, and we would ask you, how are you doing that? Now, you may say, okay, well, my counselor only does counseling. We have other people who do back office work. We have non-certified counselors taking in the application, doing intake, and any number of activities. But we really look to you to justify and determine what it is that you need in order to meet your work plan. And Jerry has a really good answer for that question. Jerry, can I get your input on this too?
Well, sure. You know, the issue is really one about developing your workforce and making sure that you have adequate numbers of housing counselors to carry out the work plan in a reasonable and customary manner. You know, what is reasonable? Well, reasonable is a reasonable workload for that housing counselor, ensuring that there is backup in case they go on vacation or should leave the agency. Then customary is look at how many housing counselors you normally have had in the past to support your work plan. And that is a good indication of how many you're going to need to have served going forward into the future. And I think, you know, if you follow that reasonable and customary kind of thought process, you know, you'll figure out how many you really need to have for your agency.
Thank you. Next question. Has the HUD Handbook 7610.1 been updated? If so, where can we find it?
So we are going through final clearances for the updated HUD handbook. And it's our hope during the fourth quarter of this year, we are going to be releasing it to the world for prime time. We know this is something that our entire community has been looking forward to receiving for quite a period of time right now. So we are literally in the final stages of producing an appendix for the document. It will go through clearance, and we hope you'll be receiving it towards the end of the fourth quarter this year. So October, November, we'll see where we are.
Thank you. Next question. Can a counselor be employed by more than one company? I think we already answered that.
Yes, as long as it's a HUD-approved housing counseling organization.
Next question. How long does a new employee have to pass the HUD certification?
Jerry?
Well, you know, this, you know, is kind of this idea of the grace period, I think. And the grace period ended on August 1st of 2021. Now, in order to see a HUD client, a housing counselor has to be certified. Counselors who are not certified cannot see HUD clients and assist them for HUD program purposes. So the real advice here is to plan ahead, look at your workforce, employ sufficient HUD certified housing counselors to carry out those projected work plan activities. And if you only have one certified housing counselor, you're going to want to have backup, because if that housing counselor goes on vacation, what are you going to do? We don't want to see an agency closing its doors or not seeing clients because the counselor who's one housing counselor who's certified went on vacation. So make sure there is backup in case that counselor leaves, separates from the agency, and that you can continue your continuity of operations and continue to execute your work plan.
Yeah, and I'll add, I want to commend the large number of organizations who have developed programs, one, to mentor new hires literally during their first month of employment, and two, as well, to ensure that they have adequate time during their employment to study for and ultimately pass the exam. There are many models of this. Some are internal to organizations, some are through partnerships with training providers in the housing counseling community. Regardless of all of that, it's a significant step towards professional development. We hope to be working with all of you to think about alternative ways as well prior to onboarding to work to sponsor counselors to take the exam. But this is an area that we're having an ongoing conversation. For example, if there is an offer of employment and the employment starts at a later date, can we in fact work to get that counselor certified before the first day? And there are other ideas floating out there similar to that that Jerry and his team are going to be looking at with our Office of Accountability as well. And operationally, we hope to build upon this moving forward.
Thank you. Next question. Where can we find what budget items can be invoiced to HUD grants?
So there is a wealth of information available online in this space in our Q&A on HUD Exchange. I would actually recommend, if you need guidance in this space, to reach out to your point of contact because frankly, HUD as a foundational funder in this space is extremely liberal in what in fact we will allow to be billed against the grant. If it's related to your housing counseling program and needs, and you have quantifiable and justifiable costs, it's very likely to be included in your budget, whether it's technology, rent, or any other expense. Outreach as well to a point as well. So the resources are available in Q&A through, and I really suggest you speak to your point of contact first.
Thank you. Next question is, can someone take the exam and become certified after August 1st, and an agency then becomes certified?
Yes.
Right. How do you oversee local municipalities and their requirement to hire certified counselors?
Actually, our work with any HUD-approved organization or public agency, it's a very similar process. Jerry or Phyllis, would you like to speak to that in any way?
Well, there are two ways that local government comply with the housing counselor certification rule. One, which is the one that we see less, is that they become HUD approved themselves and their counselors or employees become certified. Now, if they want to become HUD approved, we have an expeditious process for local government because there are a lot of things we don't have to look at when it comes to the approval process. It's not like reviewing a nonprofit. There are certain things we take for granted, certain things that we don't do that we do with a nonprofit. For instance, we do not do background checks on local government officials, and we also do not look so closely at budgets. We don't get audited financial statements because local government doesn't have those. So we're able to do a more expeditious process. But then the question is it reasonable for that local government agency to build out a housing counseling business within their normal operations? And in most cases, the answer is no. So what we do is we look to partner those local government entities with a HUD-approved housing counseling agency within their jurisdiction so that through a memorandum of understanding or a contract, they're able to not only serve the clients they need to serve for whatever program is covered under the rule, but they're also able to underwrite the cost of housing counseling to those agencies. And in a lot of cases, this is working very well, especially with housing authorities and those CHODOs, community housing development organizations, and other small government entities as well. So that is our preferred model.
Thank you, guys. Next question. Could a trained non-HUD certified housing counselor counsel clients if the work is overseen by an experienced HUD certified counselor?
Nope.
In short. Next question. What work can uncertified counselors do?
Well, any person working, within a housing counseling agency that works in support of the agency's operations can assist a housing counselor with some basic administrative tasks. They could assist them in any number of ways. They just can't counsel HUD clients.
So, for example, intake would be a very appropriate area to facilitate efficiencies in a housing counseling office. It could be scheduling appointments or follow-up for documents that are needed. It also could be working in conjunction with other organizations such as ensuring if there is the need for counsel, legal services, or otherwise, that there is effective coordination between the agencies. But the core areas of housing counseling, that must be provided by our certified counselor.
Thank you. Next question. If the exam is updated fresh, as mentioned, will the studying guide be updated as well?
I think that's a fair assumption for sure. But I also wouldn't want to set expectations extremely high that we're going to see a totally different type of exam. We were mandated by Congress to include certain areas of focus and a certain level of ability by housing counselors. And so while we'll be really keep an open mind how to approach updating the exam so it works for all of us and ensures the quality of our profession, we want to be sure there's zero discrimination or any concern or perception of that as well moving forward. What I trust to say is that it will probably still be a challenging exam.
Thank you. Next question. Why is there no score provided for the housing counseling exam and only a pass or fail determination? Is there a way to see which areas a housing counselor performed well on? Or so that they'll be able to see where they need to improve?
Well, the exam provides the numerical score that the counselor got. Usually it's, a percentage of 500 points. And they know how close they came. They do get a point score when they get their exam results. Now, we cannot give direct answers. We cannot say you missed question 5, or question 26, whatever. But if the counselor uses the tools that we have given them, the practice exam and the knowledge assessment, they can zoom in on the areas that they are deficient in. Many counselors, after they've taken the exam, they know what they missed, because they know what they struggled with. And right now, I could tell you that the two most challenging areas, based upon feedback from housing counselors themselves, are fair housing questions and math questions. And the fair housing one is really an odd one for us, because we just assume that housing counselors would be champions of fair housing and would understand, how to make a good fair housing referral and what all of the rules of the road are around fair housing issues. And it seems that that is not the case, is what we are learning. So we're going to do a lot more work around fair housing training going forward. And in fact, we're starting a partnership with HUD's Fair Housing Equal Opportunity Office to help address this, so that housing counselors perform better in this area, because it is so important. And the math part of it, we're trying to iron the kinks out of some of the questions, but recognizing fully that, if you're like me and you're not good at math, this is going to be a challenge.
Thank you. Next question. When will the revised test version be posted?
Can I just jump in really? I'm sorry. I want to jump in really quickly because I want to double down on something that Jerry said. I encourage any housing counselor that wants to know where their strengths and weaknesses are prior to the exam to do the knowledge assessment. The knowledge assessment does a really good job of saying, here's where you did well and here's where you didn't do so well. And specifically says, here's the questions you didn't answer right. So I just kind of wanted to jump in and say that about the knowledge assessment.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've noticed that on many of the social boards, people really speak very highly of that as a tool.
Thank you. And so the question about when the revised test will be posted.
So this test was developed by a contractor who is an expert in this area of testing, working with adult learners, ensuring appropriate certification, all of the aspects we've been talking about, ensuring the appropriateness of the test for the audience that we are really testing for their knowledge and their knowledge base. It will take time to update the exam. We don't want to rush it. We do periodic updates, as Jerry has noted. So it's difficult to give a firm date. Other than that, with input from the counseling community, as well as subject matter experts who we use to develop the test, we will update it. Jerry, there's been sort of past practice here. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, for the past updates, we've tried to aim for fall, sometime after September. And we're doing that, trying to aim for that same time period this year. And we'll do our best to get a new updated exam and all the collateral materials that go with it out in the fall.
Thank you. Next question, are housing authorities being held accountable to get their staff certified as housing counselors?
Well,
Jerry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, that is a compliance issue that really falls on the public housing side of HUD. And we're working with public housing to ensure compliance for housing authorities. We have many housing authorities that are HUD-approved housing counseling agencies that are in compliance. And other ones that are not HUD-approved housing counseling agencies are being encouraged to partner with a HUD-approved agency in their jurisdiction. The idea of a, overworked, underpaid housing authority staff with a waiting room in normal times, pre-COVID maybe, full of people waiting to be seen in a 10-year Section 8 list to contend with. The idea that they're going to build a housing counseling business in that environment maybe is a bridge too far. So that's where we start doing technical assistance and offering, the help to find a partner so that they can be in compliance. The compliance part for public housing authorities is rests over in the Public Housing Office of HUD.
Thank you. Next question. When can we view by state how many agencies are currently certified? Will it be posted on the HUD site that they are certified?
Every single active agency currently in HUD's network is certified. So if they are on HUD's website right now, they have a certified housing counselor and they are a HUD approved or participating agency. So of all the, 1,561 agencies, all of them are in compliance.
Yeah. On that point, unrelated to the question, but important for everyone to know, the Office of Housing Counseling is working with the Office of the Chief Information Officer at HUD. Many of you are aware that the search engine for housing counseling organizations, as well as the 800 number, is quite dated. It's kind of quirky, and we are in the process now of moving expeditiously to update the systems, both the telephonic system as well as the information on the HUD website, with also more robust information that benefit consumers looking for a housing counselor. So our hope is in the very near future, in the coming few months, there will be a much more robust way to find housing counseling organizations nationwide, within state, multi-state, within zip code areas, communities, really to meet the consumer where they want to be to call their counseling organization of choice. And as well, there will be a much updated telephonic system that we are developing as well. So stay tuned for that. There'll be a more formal announcement when it's formally released.
Thank you. Next question. Will the states, counties, and cities be required to work with agencies that are certified in providing funds?
Jerry?
Well, this is really a question about funding more than anything else. And funding drives business activity in our industry very much so. So if the funding comes from HUD, then in all likelihood that subrecipient, wherever they get the money from, let's say it's CDBG money that is flowing down to a locality and they want to use it for home buyer education, down payment assistance, housing counseling, any of those kind of things that could be required by either our community planning and development office as part of the grant, or layered on by the subrecipient who may decide they want this activity carried out by a HUD certified housing counselor working at a HUD approved agency, would drive that locality to seek out a HUD approved housing counseling agency to help them carry out that program activity. So the real thing to watch are grant agreements and what it says in those grant agreements, because that's going to drive the economic and counseling activity around it.
Thank you. And our last question. How is HUD prepared to support small agencies that struggle to attract and retain certified counselors as the cost of training and succession increases?
Well, HUD is making a great effort, particularly the Office of Housing Counseling, to expand how we provide services to local housing counseling organizations. I hope folks took note that our traditional intermediary meeting became a community meeting, and of the 1,250 or so participants across the country, 60% of our participants were from local housing counseling organizations. We hope to expand upon that, and we're taking everyone's feedback to improve upon the program and establish other programs. We value our relationships with our intermediaries and state housing finance agencies, but we know there's a strong group of organizations that really provide terrific services locally, and they have unique needs. And so we're developing our program now to try to more directly meet those needs. As well, we have had an unprecedented number of webinars over the past year, both to address the challenges of the pandemic and keep everyone up to date, but on a host of issues also to design to build your capacity. As we move forward, in particular, we're thinking very generatively or creatively about how we're going to try, if we do, as an Office of Housing Counseling, have a larger appropriation, and that's an if beyond our control, to in fact provide additional support to reach underserved populations, to ensure racial equity, and to ensure that our organizations, particularly our local as well as our national, have the resources to provide even more services. So this is something that we're putting a lot of time and focus into. We're even looking at how we work in the area of disaster relief. You know, disproportionately, unfortunately, some of the disasters that our nation has experienced as a result of hurricanes, fire, other issues have unfortunate and disparate impact on communities of color and low-income communities and elsewhere. There's environmental impact that have a racial overlay, for example. We're also focused on that as part of our equity assessment internally. So we look forward to building these programs in conjunction with you, because we are very much focused on ensuring that we serve the populations that you serve. And we want to do it through what we hope will be an unprecedented level of service to our agencies, but ultimately to our consumers and our citizens across the country.
Great. I want to say thank you so much to both of you and to Phyllis as well for hanging in with us and answering questions. There are a few questions that we didn't get to, and if you all are okay with it, I will send them to you and you can answer in writing, and then I'll send it out to our list, the answers to the questions that weren't answered. Is that agreeable?
Sure, that's great. Ellie, can I just add one additional item to David's response?
For sure.
And that is that, remember that HUD-approved housing counseling agencies and their staff can always qualify for scholarships through our training NOFA. And those scholarships are available on a first-come, first-served basis and underwrite the cost of tuition for those housing counselors. And also remember that HUD training that is done directly by HUD is always free and open to everybody. And we hope that you all avail yourself of all of the capacity building training and program training that we provide, so that there should be no cost to get that training done for your counselors.
And Ellie and Bruce and everyone, thank you for allowing us to spend time with you. You know, I think a number of the suggestions we're going to take back and consider, as well as we'll explore if we can share more information from our subcontractor on due diligence with regard to the demographics of the housing counseling community. I think that's a reasonable request. And as I said, we are committed with how we move forward in the exam with our contractor and what will be a new opportunity to update to ensure that data is transparent.
Great. Again, thank you both so much. And Phyllis, thank you as well. And I am going to hand it back over now to Bruce to wrap it up.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Phyllis. And thanks for going over time. That was excellent. So just really quickly, reminder about joining NHRC if you haven't, or renewing if you can. We still have the discounts on the credit reports and the Savvy Online program. And we do notify about some of the less common funding opportunities that are out there. But the real reason to support housing counseling is so we can do the advocacy work we're doing, which really means I think this year we're going to see substantial increases in funding, and that's been great. We also want to create greater housing opportunity for your organizations to work with. And with that quick note, we won't have another call next week, but we'll jump back in early September, and we'll be in touch with all the many things we're involved with. So glad for everybody that hung in there, and keep up the good work. We will be in touch soon. Bye.